and thank you for joining us here on BNC Live. I'm Brittany Jones. Well, it's been exactly 8 months since President Biden took office, and there's a growing concern from voters over his lack of progress. Last week, Biden failed to pass his police reform bill, and criminal justice reform is a major issue for the black community. And we know it was the black voters who played a key role in getting the president elected. Now, black voters want a return on their investment. BNC's Ansar Hassan reports.
As the summer officially
without excuse.
That was BNC's Ansar Hassan reporting. Now, Dr. Jonathan Collins, political science professor at Brown University, is with me now to talk about this. Dr. Collins, it's so good to have you back with us. Good evening.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, Brittany.
And so we're going to get to some of the comments that were in that story in a moment, but I want to ask you about this first. President Biden, we're talking about 8 months in. People say the president isn't making good on his promises to black America. You and I spoke about this a long time ago with all of his promises leading up to the election. What do you think about where we are now, and is that a fair assessment 8 months in?
I think if we look at where we are right now, 8 months in, we're in trouble. You know, I think the Biden administration, they rolled the backs of black voters into success in the 2020 election. And, you know, now we're looking at what's happening right now, and our promises are on the back burner. You know, the George Floyd policing bill is going nowhere. You know, the only help that seems to be on the horizon is the infrastructure bill, and it's becoming more and more unlikely that the infrastructure bill will look the way it needs to look in order to really have the impact that we need in the black community. And so, you know, right now, I think it's important for President Biden to step up and really articulate exactly how the new plans that are on the table really directly benefit black voters, because it's becoming more and more difficult to determine by the day.
Yeah. And Dr. Collins, the president ran on some key points, including closing the racial wealth gap and the income gap, protecting voting rights, strengthening the criminal justice system, and much more. But those are the things folks are saying they haven't seen much movement on. And then you just mentioned a moment ago, voting rights bills, those are stalled. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is also stalled in Washington. How long does it usually take to start seeing some real progress for a president?
Well, it depends on the amount of sort of political capital and legislative momentum that a president is able to garner. And so, you know, what we saw at the very beginning of the Biden administration, we saw a series of legislative successes. We saw the ability to corral Congress to put together support for COVID relief funding. And that was huge. What we've seen over the last few weeks are big political gaffes, which I think black voters are now paying the price for. So when the Biden administration mishandles the issue in Afghanistan, when the Biden administration mishandles the border crisis, this loses a certain amount of political capital that needs to be put towards the support for the People Act and for the John Lewis Act, things that are important not only to the Biden administration that's going to be seeking re-election in 2024, but to the lives of black people who depend on access to the ballot, but then also access to quality jobs, healthcare, and a social safety net.
Yeah. Well, one interesting thing that I heard in Ansar's story before you came on was the president does have the bully pulpit, and that he should be going out and talking about the issues on a regular basis. And they're not hearing that and want to hear how he can actually use his executive authority to prioritize changes. What do you think about that statement?
I think that's extremely important, because another important piece of information here is that if you look at what's happening at the state level, especially conservative states where you have large populations of black voters, we've seen the conservative legislators attack multiple aspects of our policy infrastructure that affect the black community. So, you know, what we're seeing in terms of making the voting right difficult, a lot of this is coming through the state level. And so what we need is President Biden to really push back against what state legislators are doing, because they're really trying to make it difficult for black folks to vote, for black folks to access some of the public services and goods that we need to try to advance ourselves. And so if we don't have President Biden speaking specifically to our needs, you know, the states can pretty much sort of keep us at their mercy and take away a lot of the things that we need.
Yeah. And we're already starting to hear, after the way Haitian migrants have been handled in the current crisis, you mentioned that a moment ago, folks are saying they wouldn't even vote for him again. Will that keep black people away from the polls next election season?
I think so. At least it's a very big concern. And so you couple the fact that there are Black voters who are having issues with the Biden administration's ability to deliver. And then on the other hand, you have states like Georgia and Texas and Tennessee that are actively attacking the right for Black voters to even access the ballot box.
Right.
And so all of this shapes up for a steep decline that we might see in Black voter turnout in the next election. And all it takes is one election to completely take the country in a downward spiral. We've seen this movie before. We don't want to see it again.
Yeah. And Dr. Collins, do you think there's still a level of, I would say, expectation that Vice President Kamala Harris should have some say in the progress of what's being done or not being done for Black America? I've heard people say, where is she in this?
It was unclear from the outset exactly how Vice President Harris fits within the administration. We weren't sure exactly what her role would be. But I think now is a perfect opportunity to break the emergency glass, bring Vice President Harris to the forefront, and allow her to be the voice for the interest of Black voters, and reassure us that the administration really has us at their heart and in their focus.
Mm-hmm. And if that isn't done, do you see Democrats losing the ticket in the future?
I think it's a risk that is very much in play. And so if you look at the last couple of elections, they've been extremely close. Mm-hmm. And all it takes is a swing of somewhere between 10 to 50,000 votes in a particular swing state, and the election outcome goes in a very different direction. And so this is the scare at the presidential level. Even before we get there, we have midterms that are coming up in 2022. Mm-hmm. And this has implications for the ability for the Biden administration to pass legislation over the final 2 years that would even lead up to that election and would help them gather even more momentum. And so time is really of the essence for them to make sure that they have the support of Black voters in hand, and that they're doing all they can to protect the rights for Black voters to be able to access the ballot box in their states.
And Dr. Collins, last question for you. I mean, we're looking at, like you said, where we are now 8 months later. What do they need to do to power through even the last few months left in this year?
They need to do what they did on the campaign trail, mm-hmm. which was go out and make an asserted effort to really appeal to Black voters. Listen to Black voters and see what they want. Go out and make sure that they're delivering messages that are central to their concerns. Find out exactly how we can improve city infrastructures, whether it's transportation, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the economy and jobs. Find out exactly what we need to do to sort of right the ship, because where we are at this 8-month point, I think is extremely dangerous for the Biden administration. And if they lose communication even more than they already have with the Black community, again, not only the midterm elections, but the presidential election in 2024 could be cataclysmic.
Yeah. Powerful words there. Well, Black America is watching and listening. Dr. Jonathan Collins, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And stay with us. We'll be right back with BNC Live after this break. Welcome back. Well, mask mandates are being re-implemented across the country as leaders work to get the pandemic under control. Now, in Charlotte, a new rule does not include a religious exemption for indoor worship services or activities for churches, parochial schools, individuals, or organizations. Our Janine Donaldson is live in Charlotte with how people are reacting. Janine, good evening. Tell us what they're saying.
Good evening, Brittany. Well, county commissioners voted to implement that indoor mask mandate. They may revoke it. Brittany, back to you.
Well, hopefully those folks are listening. Thanks to Janine there, reporting live for us in Charlotte. Well, in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis has appointed a Black doctor to the state's highest medical position. Dr. Joseph Ladapo will now serve as the state's Surgeon General and Secretary of the Florida Department of Health. He's a former researcher at UCLA and a graduate of Harvard Medical School, but his impressive background doesn't come without controversy. He comes under fire for some of his treatment ideas for COVID-19. Now, when it comes to COVID vaccines, Ladapo says he believes in promoting good health, and vaccines aren't the end-all treatment to fighting this disease. He says so much emphasis has been on COVID vaccines that it's been treated almost like a religion. Dr. Lane Rowling is with me now to talk about the latest on the pandemic. He's a virologist and infectious disease expert. Doc, good evening. It's good to see you.
Hey, good evening to see you, Brittany, and super fantastic to the BNC staff.
All right, Doc. So Dr. Joe Lapato has been tapped as Florida's new Surgeon General. He says vaccines aren't the end-all treatment for this disease and it's been treated almost like a religion. Do you think health experts have gotten lost in their effort to getting the vaccine in people's arms, that they've turned a blind eye to alternative treatments?
Yeah, I think they have. I think the reality is that everybody, most people missed the boat in the beginning of this situation. When we start talking about trying to come up with a plan for mitigation and containment of the SARS-CoV virus pandemic, endemic infection, vaccine is one small component of it. It's a holistic approach. It's everything from wearing a mask, coming up with different treatment plans, trying to create a bubble for people, understanding transmission of diseases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, use of monoclonal antibody treatment, et cetera. And the bottom line at the end of the day, what's happened is that the messages got lost. We have to understand this is a viral disease transmitted by respiratory. We have to have a mask for that. We have vaccines that are supposed to be effective. We have to use that. Every tool that we have in our arsenal to try to mitigate and contain the SARS-CoV infection, that's what we should be using, Brittany.
Yeah. And the new Surgeon General says he believes in choice, when it comes to vaccine. He has been actually criticized for supporting treatments that U.S. health officials have deemed unproven. Other countries are actually trying alternatives such as ivermectin, but because the U.S. officials are against it, doesn't mean it doesn't work. And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think the reality is that the bottom line is that we have politics got involved in this. Instead of sticking with the medicine and science, the reality is that the message has got lost. When we start talking about ivermectin, we start talking about understanding vaccine, the bottom line is you have to understand the basic science. You have to understand virology. You have to understand that vaccines plays a component. We have to understand that the vaccines neutralizing antibodies only last for 85 days. There's a reason for people to get booster shots. People looking for alternatives like ivermectin, and that information is very anecdotal, and a lot of people getting in problems with that, medical problems, because of the toxicity of using ivermectin. I've used ivermectin in the jungles of Peru on patients that have parasitic infection, very effective medication. But ivermectin itself still has to have the science and medicine to back it up. So, Brittany, we're still young in this and this whole process of this COVID healthcare crisis. We have to understand the vaccine's only been out a year. We have to understand that people looking for different alternatives to try to save their loved ones, from malaria medication, ivermectin medication, et cetera. But the bottom line, at the end of the day, malaria medication doesn't work. Ivermectin does not decrease the viral load. We have to have sound treatment based off of science and medicine that's very effective. If not, we're going to continue to be in this cycle. We know about the new R1 mutation. There's a Charlie 1-2 mutation, R1 mutations in nursing homes that are effective. And then the bottom line is that we're going to be in the same state next year if we don't get a whole and effective policy for everybody.
Yeah. And I mean, do you think, Doc, that these other alternatives actually work? Do you think that people should be looking for other ways other than the vaccine?
Well, in the reality, Brittany, when it comes to RNA viruses, it's just basic science. There is no effective treatment for any RNA virus. We don't have an RNA treatment for Ebola, dengue, chikungunya, Zika, West Nile. Most RNA virus infections are treatment is by symptomology, i.e. you have respiratory problems, we give you oxygen. You have a fever, we give you medication from that. You have diarrhea, we give you medication. That is why it's so important that we continue to do great research and science to try to find effective treatment. But this going down the road of doing ivermectin has no effect on the SARS-CoV virus, period. Yeah. Doing medication has no effect on the virus itself. And so we have to have good science to have effective treatment, or not what's going to happen is that we're going to continue to make this virus circulate through our population because people are having false realities in their treatment plans. We have to have it based in science and medicine. Brittany, you can never go wrong if you stick with the science and medicine and you have proof written and treatment protocols written and verified and great science and research.
And Doc, one of the greatest medicine isn't actually medicine that you guys have mentioned is wearing a mask. And going back to Janine's story over in Charlotte with the religious institutions now requiring the mask, what do you think about that?
I mean, Brittany, let's keep it real. You look at the states like Florida and Texas, Arkansas, and Alabama, these GOP governors, not telling people to wear a mask. Well, they were the problem. They're the one that made this infection go where it is. They were super spreader states. And the reality is that when you're dealing with something that has an airborne component, special virus is effective as the SARS-CoV virus with the different mutations from alpha all the way to mu to R1, you have to have a mask, vaccinated or unvaccinated. That mask is your frontline protection, and it's the best treatment protocol to decrease your chance of getting an infection besides all the other stuff. Wash your hands, situational awareness, understanding touching things in public arena. You got to make sure you protect your hands. Understanding, I listened to the pastor talk about people going to church. People can go to church as long as you have effective protocols, biosafety security protocols, i.e., you have to have a foot mat to disinfect people's bottom people's shoes. You have to have hand sanitizer station. And the most important thing that the churches are missing, besides having masks, vaccinated or unvaccinated, you have to have air purification units in these buildings where you have people that are congregating in masses, because the air filtration is very important, because the virus is an airborne virus. And that air filtration to decrease that viral load and make it less likely that you're going to get infected.
Yes. All right, Dr. Rowland, always weighing in on the latest of the pandemic. Dr. Rowland, thank you. And stay with us. Much more BNC Live after this break. Welcome back to BNC Live. Well, when you think of Black heroes in comic books, you can probably count the number of characters on one hand. For years, Black people have been underrepresented or misrepresented in the comic book arena until now. A new league of Black creators are turning the page on the way our stories are told. As comic book artists are recognized this weekend, this Entrepreneur Sunday, we're throwing it back a little bit to my chat with comic book creator Manuel Godoy. Manuel Godoy, thank you so much for joining us for Entrepreneur Sunday, and welcome to BNC.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are excited to have you with us. So, Manuel, some of your works actually include Kids to Kings and Sons of Nibiru. Your wife is a co-publisher who created Maury's Family Adventures. Tell us how you got started, and how did Black Sands Entertainment come about?
Yeah, well, at first I wanted to make video games a long time ago, and I was pursuing that for a minute. And eventually I realized I couldn't even afford it, and that was back in 2016. So I killed that, changed the story up, and started making comic books. In 2017, I raised $20,000 for Kids to Kings in order to make that comic book series on Kickstarter, and we haven't looked back since. Now it's called Black Sands: The Seven Kingdoms.
Yeah, and I mean, did you have a love for comics? What brought you to this point?
I'm actually a really big manga and anime guy, so I was always into that stuff. Naruto, Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball when I was growing up. Way back in the days in the 90s. I was a big geek on that stuff.
I remember Dragon Ball Z. And he was awesome. Well, ahead in sports, a SWAC football coach reflecting on the season so far, taking us inside the huddle. Plus, what Olympic bronze medalist turned boxing champ is tonight's King of the Hill. James Hill is up next.
But let's take a look at St. Louis. 92, plenty of sunshine in the 90s also on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about us getting ready to go back towards like the feeling of the summer temps, and we're going back and forth.
Going back and forth, Brittany. So, of course, in Florida, we don't have all 4 seasons,
right?
But we're working with it.
Yes.
We have on our fall colors.
We have on our fall colors today. And even James, he got the program. All right, so that does it for this hour of BNC Live. We'll be back with more news, weather, sports, and entertainment. Stay with us. Yeah, you got on the tan suit.